Hi, everyone. I think it may make sense to get started now. I think a few people may be wrapping up outside, but we have the green light. So this presentation is about agility in the creative process. So I am Sean. I'm a senior producer at Last Call Media. I'm joined here by Colin Panetta, our director of UX and UI, and Nolan Richter, our art director. So the intent behind this is to keep it a little informal. So from time to time, Nolan and Colin will share some thoughts and add some subject matter expertise to these slides. And obviously, before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about Last Call Media, who we are, and kind of the work that we do. So we like to say, kind of playing on our brand, we're a digital destination. So we're a full-service creative agency, and we like to say that we enjoy work with purpose, right? Building engaging solutions that assist and support organizations working to improve the communities they occupy. So what that kind of really means is we do a lot of work with nonprofits, mission-driven organizations, and higher ed organizations. A little bit of quick history here, kind of giving some context to how we became to be who we are today. So we started in 2009. We got in early with the Drupal community, kind of right around Drupal 6, started gained that reputation of being able to do really complicated things well with Drupal. So off a foundation that does those things really, really well, we built a really solid ongoing support infrastructure. And what that kind of meant is being that last call you need to make. A lot of our clients came to us and stayed with us throughout. So every once in a while, part of supporting something means being there for every growth point. So we built a really solid creative team, two of which are here with me today. And we like to be involved in community events like this, and our ongoing contributions keep the team strong, focused, and aware of modern technologies, such as our 3-year head start with Drupal 8. So a lot of the work that we do involves solving complex creative and technical problems for a lot of really great organizations. Just a few of them here. And so when these organizations called us, one of the first things traditionally that you'd find in a project when you get started is, emotions are really high, people are really excited. What do you do? Like, what's the first thing that you should do? Well, traditionally you'd write that project plan, right? So here you go. It's a little difficult to see here on that screen, but this is like a charter, right? This is high level, but then also here are all the steps that you're going to do. Here's everything that you're going to run through, the traditional workflow, right? You're going to do that big design up front, really high fidelity comps. This can take anywhere from 5 to 8 months. This is the final version, by the way, and you need to get that signature, and you're going to store it on a server, and you're going to forget about it until that plan that you had contradicts reality. So this kind of speaks to the waterfall model here, that old relay race where you go from one to the next. You don't have any feedback loops. You focus on the phase you're in, so all your energy is dedicated to specification or design. You have really, really long, painful release cycles, and it's even more painful when you get to the end of a cycle and you're wrong. And one of the things about when we first started this type of work, we thought, you don't start design until all your specifications are done, right? You need to be 100% on your spec, final, and approved, right? And then you end up with that first big reveal, right? So here we are. We took 3 months to put that plan together. We went back to our desks. We did some research, a lot of other great deliverables that were discussed here today. We put together our thoughts and we bring it to you 2 months later or a month later. You go to this first big reveal. And then you end up with questions like, well, what about this line from that RFP that we wrote a really long time ago? Where's the state-of-the-art human-computer interaction from this comp? And these are actual really real lines that we had in people that have asked us to do proposals. So this is, one of my top 10. I really like to just sort of drill down and ask what they actually mean by this. And then another one, right? Especially when you find yourself in a creative project. This project, we need to see depth, right? It needs to be a vibrant look to the page. I don't know if anyone in here really knows what that means, right? And then traditionally, your project manager or whatnot would end up on the couch, just really stressed out. You had that iron triangle, your scope, budget and your timeline. You know, there's nothing in that triangle that speaks to fidelity or quality. And you start pointing fingers. You never told me what state-of-the-art computer interaction means. You know, a lot of blame, right? That rarely worked. We spent too much time working on things that ended up changing, created friction, created noise, reduced flow. And one of the projects that we started on, worked on really early on as we started to branch out in the creative process was for a sports psychologist.
Yeah, and we, like we were saying, this was a project that we went into, and it was an early one for us, and everybody, I think, has those, like, really early projects that they just learn a tremendous amount from, and and like Sean said, it was extremely linear, each phase that we did, and there was no overlap between phases. And most importantly, at the time, we thought that was the only way to do a project, that we couldn't move on from a certain phase until it was 100% approved and final. And this particular client is very verbose, and the feedback that we would get when showing them anything would just be a huge email. And because we were so rigid, and because we felt like we had to complete everything 100%, we would end up following up on all these points, and it was kind of like whack-a-mole, but like all the moles come up, and there's just nothing you can do about it. And so it just kind of things just kind of spun out. So that was a really big learning project for us in terms of like, oh well, maybe we kind of have to think on our feet a little bit.
Yeah, like Colin said, we were too linear. There's always this pressure to go from one big deliverable to the next big deliverable, and you couldn't start the next one until you had finalized the first one, right? So there's this scene in I Love Lucy where they're working at a chocolate factory. And when I saw this, when I was much, much younger, I didn't really understand it, but as it came up in other contexts, as we started reflecting on our model and the creative process, I remembered this scene. I don't know if anyone in here has seen it or remembers it, but they're working at a chocolate factory, and the pieces of chocolate are coming out one by one, and they're tasked with wrapping the chocolate. And then all of a sudden, someone on the other side of things turns up the speed on the chocolate machine, and all of a sudden they get, I don't know, dozens of pieces of chocolate coming out at the same time, and they don't know how to deal with all that feedback, right? So kind of the parallel that I'm drawing here is that, you know, we learned that we need to be checking in regularly, and we need to be getting frequent feedback so that it's minor and controlled, rather than just checking in once, right, when it's like that I Love Lucy, the chocolate factory being turned up to 100, and then you end up with that whack-a-mole situation where all the moles come up. And then eventually, right, as confidence in kind of what you've built diminishes, you end up in that dreaded space of pixel pushing, and then it just takes forever to get out of there. Right, so we learned that we need to avoid at all costs late learning. So spending all this time defining how we wanted things to be, and all that ended up changing anyway, we needed to think about ways to avoid late learning. So we adapted. We stopped trying to figure out how to write the perfect plan and focused all of our energy on being better at adapting to change. We want to make sure that when the plan fails, right, because that's what happens to plans, even the best laid plans often fail, we recover as quickly and as cheaply as possible. Right, and that's for everyone involved. So plans are incredibly valuable, I'll say, and a great exercise to kind of get that high-level glide slope as to kind of what we're going to be doing together. But if you follow them, you end up with quite a bit of waste. So one of the things that we learned is that we want to start communicating early and escalating once. So design especially is subjective and definitely debatable. So we want to make sure that we're getting any of our work up in front of customers and users as quickly as possible. One quote that someone said once, I'll quote him again later, is that great ideas are fragile and need a lot of friends. So we want to be talking about things as we're delivering things. We want, more importantly than following the plan, is alignment on what we're doing. So we should be gaining that alignment in terms of all the exercises that we're doing. If we fall out of alignment, things begin to fall apart quickly, and that's the beginning of projects going on forever. So we need that alignment in order to successfully adapt and deliver the right amount of work. Another thing is creativity is a team sport, no silos. Everyone, break down those silos. We get researchers, business analysts, UX, UI, and design, development, working together. get that feedback early and often. So one of the things that we think about the creative process is that it's essentially a series of alignment exercises to help groom a backlog for then eventually development to execute. So we want to make sure that we're understanding the problem and validating if our solution and approach is correct, and then as those things become true, then we throw them into a backlog. So this is kind of the lean UX model. I'm sure some of you have seen it, but we focus on defining the experience as quickly and as fast as possible over then building those heavy, long-winded deliverables, right? So in the beginning, we'll do some research, we have some ideas, do some analysis, draw some conclusions, right? And then we'll take that and we'll make it, right? We'll do some low-fidelity sketches. We basically want to figure out what's the quickest possible way to illustrate the intent of what we're describing. And then we'll check it, right? We'll get that alignment, we'll test it, we'll throw it in front of customers and users, and then we'll just keep that circle going, right, as you begin to iterate. You check it, you bring it back to think, was it right? What is our feedback on this? Do we adapt? Do we pivot? Do we abandon it completely? This model allows us to iterate. So we're doing essentially these four things at the same time. So instead of focusing exclusively on defining a specification or design, we're doing spec work, design work, prototyping, and testing essentially at the same time. These frequent release cycles have significantly less risk. So rather than doing that big design moment when we've been on our side of the fence for 2 months and now here we go, you run the chance of getting that wrong. So what we prefer to do is release regularly, so on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. So we reduce the amount of risk for surprises because there's nothing really worse than working on something for 2 months and getting it totally wrong. And kind of when we've started thinking about this, there were some common concerns, right? So one of the ways that we've reflected on this is by focusing on visibility. So by releasing early and often, by communicating frequently, we're gaining that visibility pretty much throughout. That adaptability, by communicating regularly, etc., we're able to adapt should things change. We're delivering business value first, and as we proceed, risk is also decreasing. So some case studies here for how we learned some of these things and how we came to these conclusions. We do quite a bit of work with IDG, International Data Group. They run like CIO.com and a few other high-profile magazines, and they have this product called The Exchange. So they wanted to essentially, we've been working with them for a few years now, and they came to us for a higher-level conversation about taking this product that they have to the next level. It's essentially a private social network for CIOs, because CIOs need more social networks. But during, when they came to us originally, what? Yeah, so they came to us originally as a partnership for like that, our continuous delivery side of things for ongoing support, and they realized that it was time to invest in their product. So they said, all right, we've got this social network, it's not really working for us, we want to take it to the next level. Let's do a redesign for this social network. Let's get more CIOs involved. So we found, right, that they've built it, some have come. Very few CIOs were actually interested in having another social network. So despite the contract and the original planning about building this new social network, we actually pivoted quickly away from this idea. So through interviews and a pretty quick research phase, right, we adapted and abandoned it. And instead ended up focusing on their services, which is really what the users of the site wanted. They wanted more exposure into the services. What are the services? What are they entitled to? How do they access those services? So as soon as we did that, even pretty much in that same meeting, right, when we drew those conclusions, we started sketching, right? So really what we want to focus on here is at the bottom right. When the team and that the primary stakeholder actually had a moment of inspiration and thought, you know what, actually this should look a lot like Pinterest. I really like Pinterest. I think it even says that at the bottom left. So from there, right, this is pretty much as quick sketch as it possibly gets, right? There's a guy named Ken whose phone number is there, and some project managing things at the top. And then from there, we quickly went into a wireframe.
Yeah, and kind of in contrast to how we handled the last project we were talking about, CompEdge, we decided that, like Sean was describing before, we were going to do check-ins early and often. And one way that we kind of made this as fluid as possible is by updating these wireframes during meetings for stuff that we could do that for, as opposed to, you know, writing it down, putting it in a list of revisions, handing that off to somebody, having them implement it, and then a week later showing them that revision and seeing what they think. We were able to just kind of change things, and we just did that through the InVision design file sync. I know there are faster ways to do it, but that's how we do it. And so we were able to get feedback right away. And obviously there were also things that we weren't able to do in 5 seconds during the meeting, and those things we would kind of take the week time between meetings to do some of that broader work that we would then go into another meeting and kind of fine-tune live with the client on.
Yeah, and this was pretty quick too. So from that initial sketch in that first meeting, we wanted to keep that momentum moving forward. And this, I think, we turned around in only a few days, if that.
Oh yeah, we did. Yeah, in a day.
Yeah, and the idea here was to gain that alignment as quickly as possible. So this is pretty much a representation of what that stakeholder had sketched. And then as creative proceeded with thinking about representation and creative strategy, we actually started prototyping shortly thereafter. So the wireframe kind of informed, well, actually rather the other way around. We had already done an analysis of their content model and figured out kind of what made sense in terms of content structure. And they had a lot of content work that they needed to do, so we wanted to make sure that we got them the structure that Drupal gives you to manage content as quickly as possible, so that they could start playing around with things. And this is probably the simplest of I think there are about 6 content types on this. Headline, title, subtitles, pretty simple. So through that prototyping, we gave them this essentially content model, so they could add their content and experiment with how they wanted to build those content relationships.
Yeah, so let me take a second to explain this. This looks pretty chaotic right now, but this is actually the exact screen that we shared with development, the design side of things shared with development, and sat down and talked about how we were going to execute and complete this challenge that we had in front of us, which was basically that this left-hand navigation was something that we had never really dealt with before. And what you guys are looking at right now is you're looking at the website when it was at its widest breakpoint. So if we brought it down to the tablet size and the phone size, we didn't have this left-hand menu that was in our way, so we could use our 12-column grid, our 960 grid, or whatever it is that you use to typically design something that's centrally located. We basically had to kind of customize a grid and come up with something on the fly that made sense in a way that we could communicate with development to make sure that everybody was on the same page.
And even then, we could kind of only get so close to figuring out exactly how this thing was going to work. Because we go to dev and we'd be like, well, can we center the content in the area that doesn't include the sidebar? And they'd be like, well, you know, I think we can, but I don't know if it'll work exactly like that. And we kind of reached this. Well, I don't know if it reminded me actually of there's like a movie where they show how they make South Park, which is they turn episodes of South Park around in literally 6 days. It's called 6 days to air. So process is like really important to those guys. Like they're only able to do that because they've done it a bunch of times and have developed this process to be able to do that. And they said this thing in there that I always think about, where they said, like, there's always stuff that we want to go back and fix and make perfect, but at a certain point you're realizing that you're spending like 50% more effort to make it like 5% better. And you reach this kind of point of diminishing returns where, like, you know, this design wasn't exactly how it was going to work on the dev site, but it was close enough, and we could work side by side with dev, fine-tuning it to make sure that the spacing was good, however they needed it to work.
Yeah, exactly. And Colin and I work together side by side basically every day, and we hit this point, like what we're looking at right now, this isn't the final design. It's still missing a lot of the elements that made it to the final push, but we looked at it and we were kind of like, okay, well, we can keep, making sure everything's perfectly aligned, and we can make sure that we have all the elements and icons that we need in here to get final sign-off from the client. But why don't we reach out to dev, let's touch base with them and make sure that what we're trying to do right now is actually doable. So again, what we did was we sat down with this exact screen here and sat down with one of our team members, Jeff, and if I can break this slide down for you, if you're looking at everything on the right-hand side of the page that's in that white content, that is a 12-column grid, which we would basically typically have centered in any other form of a layout. And so we sat down and said, well, Jeff, hey, what if I take this 12-column grid and push this over to the right? And through that, we found that using this grid was the common ground in a visual communication between development and creative, where we said, okay, well, we have columns here in this whole grid setup, so we can both see exactly what we're talking about when I said, okay, these cards are going to take up 4 columns here, and then when this left-hand nav is here, it's going to take up 3 columns. So it was easily relatable to the rest of the design that we had pitched in that meeting. So they were easily on board and on the same page, and they were able to push this design through with our vision that we have with it.
Yeah, and they had a heads up too, so they were involved, and we had their buy-in on this approach, opposed to the alternative, right, where creative has this really great idea, builds this really amazing design, and then hands it off to development, and it's due in a month. So by getting their alignment early on, we were able to catch things and get that feedback from the development team. And it ended up coming out really nice. So it's a private network for CIOs to access their services that they subscribe through the exchange, but it translates really nicely to multiple breakpoints. Great. So for another project that we just wrapped up, for a school in Northern Virginia, we decided that the best approach to gain alignment from these stakeholders was to do a few different versions of style tiles. So using the process that we thought would work best for them, considering how things have been going so far, we built 3 different style tiles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when we met with this client in particular, we sat down and kind of walked them through the reasoning behind each of these designs. So maybe the first style tile pays a little homage to their athletics. The second style has more flexibility for imagery, and the third style tile was a little bit more modern. And they were on board. They were totally on board. They liked what they saw. They asked if they could shift a few things around, take something from maybe style tile A, style tile B, maybe make a few tweaks with the font here and there. But overall, they were happy with it. So with that, we were able to take back their feedback and say, okay, well, we kind of know where to go from here.
Yeah, we had that alignment from them. So
so you can see here, what I was talking about earlier was style tile 1 and 2 is kind of a mix of what they wanted to see. So they wanted to see this dark imagery. They wanted to see this dark blue, the black. This was all stuff that we pulled from their brand guidelines. Now, they're a military school, so we felt, we're kind of in line with everything that they were asking for, especially based off of those style tiles. So if we go through the next couple slides, you can kind of see how this played out as you were scrolling down the page.
Right, and huge surprise. We were, despite our best intentions in communicating regularly with them and thinking that we had that alignment, we totally didn't. Right, we had that 11th hour stakeholder who came in and said, this is just not who we are. Despite, again, all the deliverables that we gave you, despite the research that you did, talking to the people that considered going to the school, the students that actually enrolled, staff and faculty, right, trying to understand how they want to communicate and what kind of messaging and presentation strategy would be the most effective for them. We built this, and what we found is that we thought we had the stakeholders, we thought we had the decision makers, but they were actually just facilitating the communication to their stakeholders. So classic example there, despite asking multiple times and trying to be clear. Go for it.
So just going back to this design, basically they came back and they said, well, looks to us that you completely missed the mark here. And we're sitting there going, really? Like we really thought, based off your brand guidelines, based off those style tiles, and based off the communication that we had going with you guys, that we kind of had this nailed. You know, it kind of like, it hurt a little bit, you know, and especially, as a designer, it's like, oh, geez, all right, okay, and you know, it can be rough at times, but we had to shake it off, and we realized right there, that is when we had to pivot. We couldn't sit around anymore and say, well, no, this imagery is going to work for you, and this navigation is going to work for you. We had to listen to what their concerns were, and then when we applied that to the designs and walking through what their concerns were, we tried to find the holes in the questions or their concerns that they weren't maybe aware of. So we started asking stuff where they were in this mindset of, hey, we have to stick within our brand guidelines because these are our brand guidelines. So questions we asked were something like, well, guys, if we want to veer away from this